for joining us for this week's edition of the Epler Wood International Vlog. We have Dr. Ervin with us, my colleague at Harvard, who is the Assistant Dean of Information Technology and also a lecturer in landscape design at the Graduate School of Design. Stephen is an expert on the uses of both GIS and what is called geodesign, which combines the computational and mapping powers of GIS together with design in order to help local people better manage their places. There really couldn't be a better application of GIS and geodesign than tourism destination management. We now teach a course on this at the Harvard Extension in order to help our students better understand how to use these tools. We believe local destinations could absolutely benefit from the use of this system in order to help not only manage all of these complex questions that we're talking about in this vlog, but help local people to actually see them visually and project out what they want in their future. So let's hear what Dr. Ervin has to say about these big questions of managing people on the planet using GIS and geodesign. Welcome, Dr. Ervin, to the Epler Wood International Vlog. Dr. Ervin is Assistant Dean of Information Technology and lecturer in landscape design at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Thanks so much for joining me, Stephen.
It's always a pleasure, even remotely.
Yes. So how would you describe yourself? How do you describe to others your expertise?
I'm a maker. I build, I paint, I write. I'm a designer. And I'm a systems thinker, and I'm always looking for the way things are connected. And connections has really driven me in my own design practice and in my work at Harvard, where we try to educate a generation of not only landscape architects and urban designers for a better future and a better planet. And I'm an avid traveler as well, and I want beautiful forests and parks as well as great cities to visit. And I want my daughter to be able to do the same too.
Wow. So how do you see this field of GIS and geodesign really relating to the growth of tourism around the world?
So let me just break it down a little bit. GIS is Geographic Information Systems, the use of computers, computer technology, really to make maps, but even beyond that, to better understand maps, or more broadly, to engage in what's called geospatial logic and reasoning, where we can begin to map out what's where and what things are interacting on the planet just because of their proximity in the first place, and then because of natural systems, which might through wind and water operate over very great distances. And geodesign is a specific subset of that kind of thinking about planning and design. Really, the term has been around for about a decade now, from an idea that was promoted by Professor Carl Steinitz, my colleague here at Harvard, in his book, A Framework for Geodesign, where he said, if we could combine somehow the expertise and the science of the geographic sciences, and by implication, all the sciences, natural science and others, together with the imaginative thinking of design, assist that with all the powers of computational technology and satellites and software, and do all of that in the service of the people of the place, we might begin to have the set of tools that we need to tackle the really enormous problems that we have when we look either at a local scale or especially at a global scale all around the world in cities and natural systems. Built and natural environments are all under stress, all need not just engineering approaches to figuring out what's wrong and fixing it, but actually engaging in design processes that make one of the characteristics of great design is it solves many problems at once and makes things beautiful as well as functional. And that's really our goal. And I think that this GIS has really come of age since the 1960s when it was invented. In the late 1960s, of course, was Ian McHarg's classic book, Design with Nature. That was what brought me to where I am here today. And computers have grown along with that in the last 50 years or so. And so this idea that we can truly design with nature for people is what drives us, and what I think the great promise for GIS and geodesign is.
So how has GIS and geodesign transformed planning in terms of industry growth on landscapes?
Well, the ability to map, as we talked about, and to understand spatial processes is hugely enabled by the technologies, for example, of remote sensing satellites and increasingly drones and other kinds of things that can look down from above and inside and measure at sub-meter scales. You can see a change, just a couple of feet's difference in soil erosion, in vegetation health and growth and death and elimination and extraction of gravel and other kinds of materials from the landscape, the growth of, you can see paved surfaces, whether those are rooftops or highways. You can see different kinds of footprints of housing and various other sources of the whole question of impermeable surfaces in the development of these systems gives rise to extreme flooding because the water doesn't have a way to return back into the ground. Just measuring soil moisture and the availability of surface water, surface velocities at storm systems, all of these kinds of measurements of these kinds of natural resources become input into thinking about the question of where and how much to put what. And that really is the design of growth.
So how do you see this applying to tourism, at least in theory? We know that it hasn't been done much yet, but do you see it as this type of planning as being suited to tourism planning?
Oh, more than suited, inevitable. Tourism is big, it's global, although individual experiences can be, as I said before, quite local ones. They're always nested in this set of at least two other orders of magnitude of scale around them. And so we need more than one surveyor or one small team of folks can do. We need the power of distributed computation, modern sensing techniques, not only satellites that are seeing what we see, but that could measure in the infrared band. So we begin to detect vegetative health, heat changes as we go through climate change, understanding where heat islands in cities are developing and where heat sinks in bodies of water are. All of this is naturally part of tourism is so much about landscape and landscapes. It's about places. And because it's about places, place-based thinking is really important for it. Tourism, of course, is an enormous driver of transportation systems and consumer of transportation systems. And those two are enormous and intermeshed right now. You can't understand how the information and people and material goods are flowing through a place without knowing about airplanes and boats and trains and cars and probably animals and bicycles as well. And all of those go into this, I mentioned earlier, systems thinking. Those are all systems that have to be tied together. And in tourism, we see so much of this potential for destroying the golden egg laid by the goose if we overwhelm the beautiful mountain peak or the view of the valley or the pristine water, then we have it no longer. And that's so important, I think. And I'm very excited to begin to think that the tourism industry at large is getting used to this idea. And one of the things we are doing together, indeed, is trying to educate a new generation of professionals in this way.
Yeah, so how do you see, the evolution of this type of planning in future? At the most basic level, if you were in a community, what would you expect to happen?
Well, I think throughout the world, we're seeing a move towards making ordinary geospatial data available to every citizen who wants to, and every citizen group who needs it and can benefit from it. More so in certain kind of cultures than in others, but certainly here in the United States, we can get very fine-grained maps of existing conditions. The whole process of environmental impact review, as flawed as it may be from time to time and as subject to market forces and everything else is, begin to give us tools for talking about what we're quantifying, what we want to start measuring, and monitor from year to year as places and systems and processes change. And we can begin to, we have all of the, you've heard the term big data. We have increasingly enormous data about the places that we live and the things we are doing to those places. And not only with human intelligence and design insight, but even with AI in the future, we'll begin to be able to look at patterns at a scale that no one human being can do And that's the scale at which some of these processes are acting themselves out, for better or for worse. And so I'm very optimistic about the potential for being able to use the technology, not just to make maps, as I said before, but really to understand dynamic natural processes in interaction with human, social, cultural, economic processes, because that really is a big problem.
Yeah. Do you see science-based data being built into this in a way that will help destinations to plan a future, and how would that work?
I think that science-based data is increasingly the foundation on which all kinds of public policy decisions increasingly need to be made. And that's both at the local, the intermediate, and the global scale. In a way, and as I said before, I think that's inevitable. There is so much citizen science now that even if our federal or our state agencies are letting us down, we have eyes and ears, and increasingly digitally enabled eyes and ears all around the world, and people who care about swimming water or about birds or about organic food that are really attuned to and learning techniques for gathering and sharing this information, not only in the form of maps, but increasingly also in the form of maps as well.
So you think that these systems that you've talked about for measurement and mapping will really help the tourism industry and governments to work within what we might call a finite planet and keep within limits?
If the tourism industry or government are motivated to work within the limits of a finite planet, absolutely, because when we talk about finite, we're talking about measurement.
All right. Okay, well, thank you, Stephen, for this great interview and for joining me today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I'm really excited the way that you're beginning to bring these ideas to the world.
This conversation about how to use GIS and geodesign to manage destinations really has a lot of implications for destination managers around the world. Not only will they be able to look at and use big data, but they can put it on maps in order to allow industry and local residents to all weigh in using a systematic approach that gives them visualizations of what they might anticipate in future. I think that this is the time to really begin to implement this type of planning so that those who are really under the gun to come up with good decisions have good tools to work with. There's little question that GIS is an excellent tool in order to manage the implications of industrial growth on landscapes. So why not apply this on a grand scale around the world to help us make better decisions on the growth of tourism? Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Epler Wood International Vlog.